Welcome to Brisbane. All right, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking Brisbane hasn't got any history, it hasn't got any soul, it's just steel and glass. Well, if that is your attitude, you are hideously prejudiced, and I am about to rip the scales from your eyes, because around every corner there's a great story. Up every alleyway there's a superb piece of history. This is a city of hidden jewels. In fact, I'm standing on top of one right now. Welcome to the real Brisbane. Well, the other one's real too, but you know what I mean. Taking me to the capital of Queensland. No mad dogs, but this Englishman is going out in the Brisbane sun. To play politics... That must have been taken right here on the night of the demonstration, yeah? Play little boy soldiers... General Douglas MacArthur. And play silly buggers. Why is Grandpapa retreating? Would you come with me to the gentleman's toilet? Don't blame me, it's the heat. That's absolutely absurd. To this 24-metre high, not so hidden jewel. The Tower Mill is actually one of only 2 remaining convict buildings in Brisbane. Originally, Brisbane was called Moreton Bay, and in 1826, a guy called Patrick Logan came over here to be the new boss of the Moreton Bay Penal Colony, and by all accounts, he was a bit of a swine. But he was a great planner. So he started laying out maize fields all over the place and decided that it was vitally important that the colony had a windmill. So he put one up right here on the highest point of the colony. Well, it makes sense. Plenty of wind up there, right? Wrong. Barely any. Logan was stuck with a mill which had nothing to power it. So he decided on a little modification. Excuse me. Did you know that this was never actually used as a windmill? It was a punishment for the convicts. Did you know that?
Is that right?
No, really.
Well, would you help me demonstrate how that worked?
Yeah.
It means you need to be on a treadmill. Now, if you just line up like that. Now, if you imagine the treadmill was like a long barrel going along like that, and you've got a handle here. So put your hands on it like that, and you start moving. There's like steps on this barrel. So yeah, that's right. That's right. And you keep going up and down. I bet you wouldn't have done it that fast because you had to do it for the whole day. I mean, you get occasional breaks. There'd probably be 2 crews at work, but you'd be pulling this thing for hour after hour after hour after hour.
Getting tired already.
Yeah, you're getting tired already. That's not even 1 minute. Keep going, keep going. Now, I'll show you why they needed the treadmill. Thank you, by the way. A few holiday makers going up and down like this may just seem a bit of a laugh, but in fact, what the convicts were doing was sheer agony. They were turning this treadmill. The treadmill was turning a big shaft which ran the width of the mill, and the shaft was turning 2 huge millstones, and from the top there down the shaft, the grain would come and it would be ground into flour. So you did get an end product, but the result of such hard labour. No wonder all the convicts thought that Logan was such a swine. Jennifer, the man who was behind the development of Brisbane as we know it today was a power-mad sadist. Is that fair?
Do you reckon? I certainly don't. Patrick Logan did a tremendous lot for Brisbane in the years he was here from 1826 to 1830. And he had the worst convicts under his control at this time. They were escaping, they were murdering each other, they were stealing from the government.
But he did apply some pretty severe punishments to these blokes.
He was known as a flogger, but the 1820s were a violent time, and these people were going to keep on testing the commandant.
But Jennifer, you have convict ancestors, haven't you?
Yes, of them, and I'm very proud of them. Still got the thin ankles.
So you reckon that this man, who history tells us was an absolute villain, was actually a bit of a hero?
He's had a bad press.
He's had a bad press. So Logan was, after all, this really good man. We're going to have to rewrite the history books. A lot of people are going to be shaking their fists at you, Jennifer.
I know, I can take it.
Thanks a lot. So, on to the hotel. One of the interesting things about this is that it's modelled on that mill. It actually used to be called the town... Hang on a minute. Are you still doing it? That's absolutely absurd. That's beyond the call of duty. Abscond. Now, let go. Off you go, off you go. Thank you very much. Thank you. Anyway, back to the Tower Mill Hotel. In 1971, the all-white South African rugby team was staying here when a demonstration against the tour turned violent. So why was there such a fuss about the Springboks tour? I mean, at the end of the day, it was only a game of rugby, wasn't it?
Well, that was the beginning of the serious protest against apartheid. And the significance of the protest against the Springboks was that at that time, the Springbok team banned non-whites.
That didn't worry Joe Bielka-Peterson, state premier at the time. Law and order issues were grist to his political mill, and he immediately declared a state of emergency. It's fairly ironic, isn't it, that he was saying that sport and politics shouldn't mix, and yet he was the guy who was doing the mixing.
Well, often politicians speak with forked tongues, but he was a past master at the art of saying something and meaning something completely else.
Can I have a look at this photo? That's extraordinary. That must have been taken right here, mustn't it? Just right bang here.
It's taken precisely where we're sitting.
On the night of Thursday, July the 22nd, about 400 student protesters gathered outside the hotel. Joe sent 500 city, country and special branch officers to take them on. When the cops charged, things turned ugly.
As the police were chasing the demonstrators, a number fell, broke bones, suffered significant injury.
When the Wallabies and the Springboks played their controversial match 2 days later, the violent scenes were repeated. This explosive mixture of sport and politics, which began at the Tower Mill, set the tone for 2 decades of controversial Conservative rule in Queensland. So for those people who are interested in civil rights, it was a horrible day, but it is a piece of Australia's history, and it took place right here.
It's an important piece of Australian history. The park is largely the same. The tower is the same. But most Queenslanders under 35 or 40 hearing this for the first time would say, well, we didn't know that.
Well, they do now if they've been watching this programme. Cheers, mate. Thanks a lot. See you. I'm heading down into the city via Jacob's Ladder. So what's weirder than a set of steps named after the ones in a biblical dream? Try these sculptures at the bottom, based on characters from a 2,500-year-old Greek tragedy. This is Agamemnon, who's been away fighting in Troy for 10 years. Here's Cassandra, his hostage, the mad prophetess. Meet Clytemnestra, Agamemnon's unfaithful wife, who's been bonking this bloke, Aegisthus. Clytemnestra gives Agamemnon a loving welcome home, kiss, 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 and then she and Aegisthus hack him to death. With crazy Cassandra in the background going, I told you so, I told you so. And I bet you that 999 out of every 1,000 Brisbaneites who walk past here have got no idea that they're in the epicentre of a maelstrom of blood and horror and sexual infidelity. They probably think it's something to do with Doctor Who and the Daleks. See, I told you that Brisbane is full of fantastic stories. Come on, we're moving on. So, off down Edward Street now. I'm leaving ancient Greece behind and heading for a Renaissance revival-style building to relive World War II. Now that's what I call a walk. There's some really interesting history in this building, which I didn't know anything about until today. In 1942, it was decided that Brisbane would be the new headquarters for the Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific in the Second World War. And they chose this building as the headquarters. Why did they do that? Well, take a look at it. It's big, it was modern at the time, it was built in 1934, still looks pretty good today, doesn't it? But most importantly, it was made of concrete and steel, so if a bomb whacked it, it offered at least some protection. And who was it they were so keen to protect? Well, there's a clue behind these doors. This office has been lovingly maintained just as it was during the Second World War. And above the fireplace, that's not a picture of a kangaroo or Robert Menzies, it's George Washington. Because this was the office of the Supreme Commander of Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific, not an Australian, General Douglas MacArthur from the US of A. And this is his actual pen set, that's his blotter. There's his telephone, although that's not historically accurate because he had such a morbid loathing of telephones that he wouldn't have one in the office. And if there was a phone call for him, his secretary used to have to bring a phone in and plug it in so he could hear it. The reason Mac was here was because he'd been forced to flee, strategically retreat, from the Japanese invasion of the Philippines. Not his finest hour, it has to be said. And all the time he was here, he used to go around Australia saying, "I shall return." In fact, the American government wanted him to change it to "We shall return," but he wouldn't, which I think gives us quite a strong impression of the kind of man he was. MacArthur and the US forces transformed Brisbane. Prior to the war, 300,000 people lived here. Once the Yanks arrived, that was more than doubled to over 600,000, including 2,000 black GIs. Which was 2,000 too many for the Australian government's liking, thanks to a charming piece of legislation called the White Australia policy. MacArthur's response was that if Australia wanted help, it would have to take what it got, and reluctantly it did. Mind you, that didn't stop the government segregating the blacks from the white population. The black area was South Brisbane, which is over there across the bridge on the other side of the river. And that was somewhere where no respectable white girl would ever go, particularly after dark. Well, at least that's what they said. It wasn't true, of course. Loads of girls did go there, partly because of the jazz and also to fraternise with the Allies. Have you seen that? Look, on the top of that building up there, John Mills himself. Let's go and have a look. I don't know what it means. John Mills himself. It's a bit egotistical, isn't it? I think it's this one. Come on. Hi, excuse me, I'm sorry to pest you. I'm Tony Robinson.
Hamish, pleased to meet you, Tony.
Have you any idea why it says John Mills himself on the front of your building?
Well, John Mills built the building. He was a printer. The urban myth is that his sign was a direct response to John Reed and Nephews, whose building is next door.
So why did he write himself then?
I think it was his personal statement. Showed a little bit of humour, perhaps.
I see, the other bloke needed his nephews, and
yes.
he was, yeah.
Need no relatives.
So was this place a printer's originally?
That's right. For at least until the war, so far as I know, when I understand General MacArthur had occupied this building as a printer, as part of his operations. So.
That interests me, because I didn't know until today that MacArthur had ever been in Brisbane, and yet he was in this very shop.
I don't know if he was, but his forces were, yes.
And now you've got 1 million books.
Yeah, allegedly. I ask people to count them when they ask.
Any curious ones, interesting ones?
You might be interested in the oldest book in the shop.
Sure.
There's a beautiful, the fourth book from the left behind you is Arcadia.
Oh, this one here.
That's the one.
Sir Philip Sidney, he was a poet and soldier at the court of Queen Elizabeth, isn't he?
You know more about him than me, I think.
Not very much. What's the date of this?
1633.
Wow. You see, I told you, even in Brisbane, you can find really old stuff. This is old, isn't it? Well, thank you for that.
It's a pleasure, Tony.
I wasn't even meaning to come in here.
I'm glad you did. Have
Thank
a nice
you.
day.
See you. Right. Forgotten where I'm going now. Oh, yes. In this direction. So, who have we met on our walk around Brisbane? Well, there's been a mob of criminal Brits, a caste of ancient Greeks, and an army of fighting Americans. And they've all left their mark in more ways than one. This is Brisbane City Hall, which is actually the largest city hall in the whole of Australia. But what I wanted to show you was this. You always want to keep an eye out for one of these when you're on a walk. And down here is the basement of the City Hall, and the whole thing is undergoing a mammoth refurb at the moment. So these guys in the red day-glow jackets are engineers, architects, that sort of thing. Sorry to burst in on you unannounced, my brother. Thanks. What intrigues me about this place is that it used to be, in the Second World War, the Red Cross tea room where young soldiers from out of town used to come for a bit of cheer and a cup of tea, and they'd all get a welcome pack. And among all the other goodies, there would be a pencil. And I'm going to show you what they used to do with that pencil. Lyris, would you come with me to the gentleman's toilet?
Certainly.
Thank you very much. Well, I haven't asked a young lady to do that ever. Well, certainly not since the 1960s, anyway. During the refurb, one of the first things that they had to do was hack all the plaster off the walls. And in this corridor, they were doing just that. And this was revealed. A whole wall full of Second World War soldiers' autographs. So the urinal, all the stalls, were actually here, weren't they?
That's right. After the men did what they had to do, they then took out their pencils and signed their names, as young men do all around the world.
There's something really rather sweet and tragic about that, isn't there?
Yes.
Oh, there's a lieutenant there. Lieutenant, I can't read his name.
We think it's Gallon.
Yeah.
We've never been able to identify him, which means the highest ranking person on the wall that we have been able to identify is here, and it's Warrant Officer First Class Cross.
What's your favourite?
It has to be Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott is an original rat of Tobruk.
Oh, like the desert rats, the guys
Yes.
who fought in the North African
Yes.
desert. Yeah.
He was shot in the toe.
A lot of these guys must have died during the war, mustn't they?
No, they all came back alive.
How do you know that?
153 have been identified so far, and every single one of them has come back alive.
That's really mystic, isn't it?
It's wonderful, yeah.
This is a great piece of history, just a snapshot in time, all these guys going off to war. I really like that. Well, thank you very much for showing
You're
me.
welcome.
And also thank you for coming to the lab with me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You know, I can so picture that 1940s tea room in my mind, with the doilies on the tables and the scones on the plates and the crackly Glenn Miller 78 on the record player. What a tragedy it is that we don't have tea rooms anymore. What we do have, of course, is this stuff, isn't it? The cafe culture, where apparently you can get served by guys dressed as builders. Why have you got the helmet on?
Well, there's hundreds of people wearing them across the road, so we thought if we dress the same, maybe they'll come and spend lots of money here and we'll get rich.
Does it work?
It hasn't yet. They don't drink much coffee, but we're hoping.
I was over there 5 minutes ago. Do I qualify for a free coffee?
No, you should have been here yesterday. We had free coffee for TV shows, but
yeah, right.
again, no one turned up.
I believe that, I really do. See you, thanks a lot. My next stop is across King George Square, which, like every main square anywhere, boasts an eclectic mix of pigeon rest stations. But there's one that rather tickles my not-so-royalist fancy. It's a fairly bog-standard royal statue over there. It's actually George V of England who reigned from 1910 to 1936. And originally that statue was facing the other way, towards City Hall. Then in 1954, his granddaughter Queen Elizabeth came out to Brisbane. And you imagine how excited all the local dignitaries were, and you imagine how horrified they were when the Queen looked at the statue and said, "Why is Grandpapa retreating?" So, out of respect for her, some years later, they turned the statue round. So now it looks as though the King is charging up Ann Street towards Fortitude Valley. Although why he'd want to invade a red light district, I'll leave that to you to judge. OK, there are two words I never thought I'd say on these walks: shopping and mall. But we're going inside one for two reasons. Firstly, because the Brisbane Arcade is one of those hidden jewels I told you about earlier. And secondly, because it involves a murder that's shrouded in mystery. In the first part of the 19th century, Brisbane didn't have all these fancy shops and artworks and music ringing in your ears. It was a really, really rough place. And in the year 1848, the dismembered body of a guy called Robert Cox was found. And he'd been drinking at a pub called the Bush Inn, and they searched the room of the cook there, a guy called Fife. They found a blood-stained apron, and Fife was arrested, charged, and he was hung for the murder of Robert Cox. But that's not the end of the story, because there was another man in the pub that night, a young guy called Patrick Mayne, who went on to become a butcher, was extraordinarily successful and made a shed load of money. In fact, after he died, his money went into creating this beautiful arcade. But many Brisbaneites will tell you that Mayne got rich by killing and robbing Robert Cox, a murder he confessed to on his deathbed. He said it wasn't Fife who'd killed Cox at all, it was him. They'd hung the wrong bloke. But even though this has got to be one of the most famous stories in the whole of Brisbane, you, Jack, don't believe it, do you?
I don't, Tony. I don't believe that Patrick Mayne was there that night.
But come on, he made a deathbed confession.
Oh, I know people believe that these days, but there's no evidence that he did. Old-time detectives will tell you that deathbed confessions aren't worth a grain of salt anyway, so even if he made it, the chance of it being true is unlikely.
But don't people say that he used the money that he stole from Cox in order to kickstart his financial empire?
Well, they say that, but it was really his wife and children that took his real estate investments and built them up into real wealth. He himself, at his death, was quite cash poor.
Look, you do realise you've just brought this most famous folktale crashing to the ground.
I know, Tony, but I guess that's what historians are supposed to do, look for the facts behind these stories.
Mind you, we do still have something, don't we? We do still have what must be one of the most beautiful shopping arcades in the whole of Australia. Set a personal best for time spent in a shopping mall, I think we should move on, don't you? Our next and sadly last stop is a tasty one, a spot of high tea with a dash of quirky history. Excuse me, ladies, is it all right if I butt in for a moment? Do you have any idea which piece of food on this cake stand was invented here in Queensland?
Lamington.
You're absolutely correct. This beautiful thing. But do you know why? No? Well, it was named after Charles Wallace Alexander Napier Cochrane Bailey, who was otherwise known as... Lamington, Lord Lamington. Exactly. You see, you do know stuff, don't you? And he was the governor of Queensland at the turn of the last century. And the story goes that when Australia became federated, he threw a very late party, and his chef, who was called Armand Galland, hadn't got enough food. So he poked around in his pantry, and what ingredients do you think he came up with? Coconut, which nobody knew could be part of something posh in Australia in those days. And he found a huge amount of old vanilla sponge left over from the previous day and dipped the whole lot in chocolate. And the guests thought the whole thing was really exotic and it was incredibly celebrated. And the chef named it after his boss, Lord Lamington, as you so rightly said. Although I don't think Lord Lamington was that impressed by them, because he referred to them later as these bloody, puffy, woolly biscuits. Can I have this?
Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, thank you for sharing your tea with me. Pinch one of these as well. Enjoy yourselves.
Thank you.
Treasure hunts, a fast one's a good one. And all these hidden jewels I've uncovered in Brisbane are within 3 kilometres of each other. I've had a great time here in Brisbane, not just because I've learned about Lamingtons, but also because the scales really have dropped from my eyes. And I've seen that Brisbane isn't just about sun, sand and surf, but it's a cornucopia of great stories and history. And on that note, you can have this. I'm off to catch the waves. You might think that I'm hacking my way through the jungles of equatorial Africa on the lookout for Dr. Livingstone or somebody, but I'm not. I'm searching for the oldest living thing for miles around. And this must be it. The corroboree tree, right here on the St Kilda junction in Melbourne. Not really as jungly as I thought. Suburb of St Kilda. It's a walk on the city's wild and mild side. I'll shake out some old school ghouls, visit the birthplace of a musical generation. This is history, isn't it? I mean, it is modern history, but this is history. And meet up with the suburb's most unusual immigrants. Oh, I got a real nip then. This is a red gum. It's about 600 years old, and when it was a little seedling, it would have been by a lagoon with lovely fish and lots of things to eat, and it would have been protected from the sea by St Kilda Hill over there. The perfect place for local people to meet up, have their wedding ceremonies or whatever. And then we arrived with our sheep and our alcohol and our horrible diseases and our traffic. And by the 1950s, there was nothing left of the lagoon except this. And they even wanted to get rid of that tree to make way for this road, but there was a bit of a fight and the environmentalists won, which is only a small victory, I know, but one worth having, I think, because at least you're still alive, aren't you, darling? White settlers probably had their first glimpse of the corroboree tree in the 1840s, and it would have been a glimpse. In those lawless times, you didn't stop to admire the scenery. In the early days, St Kilda wasn't part of Melbourne. It was just a holiday resort that people would go to, a bit like Londoners go down to Brighton today. Now, I know that sounds a bit daft because they're only about 6 kilometres apart, but the road at that time was so rudimentary that only the rich people could afford the hassle of going down there, which is why the place was peppered with bushrangers. I love this picture. This is supposed to be a bushranger, and as you can see, he's already killed someone. All the other travellers are looking really scared, but the bushranger looks so sexy. You can see which side the painter's on. Well, he may have looked fairly sexy, but actually, he only had a very rudimentary plan, which was that he would tie a rope to a tree, he would stop. Sorry about this. Do you mind if I borrow you for a couple of seconds? Go over there. I'm a bushranger, and you're terrified travellers. That's it. Just stay where you are. Thank you for your time. Now, this may have seemed quite a good strategy, although nowadays it's fairly ludicrous because they're all in lycra, and so there's nowhere where they could hide their jewels or their wallets, or at least nowhere it would be appropriate for me to go. So I'm afraid I'm just going to have to leave you here to starve to death. Thank you very much for thanks for helping. Good luck. A long way since then. The dark bush is now lush park, the wheel-busting dirt tracks are now bustling sealed main roads, and the money-hungry bushwhackers have given way to penny-pinching backpackers. What do you do back in England?
I'm an actor, actually.
You are the 27-year-old me, only taller and hairier.
So have you got any advice or wisdom for me?
I haven't got any of the first, and I haven't got any of the second either, actually.
Oh, this is me, actually. Yeah.
Hey, a coffee palace. I'll tell you about these places. In the 19th century, there was so much booze around coming out of all these hotels that the temperance movement decided they wanted to lure people like you in with coffee rather than booze. So there you are.
Oh, well, thanks very much. Nice to meet you, Tony.
Stay on the wagon, brother. Lots of coffee. No gin and tonics. Couldn't afford gin and tonic, could he? Just think, 40 years from now, that bloke might be doing what I'm doing, wandering these streets, talking to a camera, and getting in the way of unsuspecting passers-by. Excuse me, that. This used to be a nursery for plants, but at the same time, it was also somewhere where artists made loads of stuff for the outdoors. About 50 artists used to be here, but now it's all been covered over with concrete and it's just a car park. Nothing left at all. Hippies are rubbish at business, aren't they? Just as well they weren't around 100 years earlier. If they had been, my next port of call up the street might never have been built, and St Kilda might never have been developed. This is Eldon House, and it's one of the most important buildings in Australia, let alone St Kilda. It was built by a sheep farmer called John Lang Curry in the 1870s, and it's typical of the kind of house that the squattocracy, as they were known, were building in those days. All right, I know it's architecturally a bit of a mess, if you're being a bit snobbish about it. There's lots of Italian features and Greek features, but basically, this is somebody saying, I am stinking rich and I'm just as smart and just as clever as all those bloody Europeans. And of course, every powerful man dreams of sitting on a throne. I want to show you something now that you don't often see, particularly on television. It's in here. It's a bit of a tight squeeze here. Shall I take the camera? Now, that is John Lang Curry's dunny. The reason that is so significant is because in the late 19th century, Melbourne started to smell. It stank so much, it was known as Smellborne. They had terrible problems with sanitation. In fact, the newspapers said that the local councillors must have lost their sense of smell, because anyone who could smell anything at all would have realised that the whole situation was intolerable. And this was the result of all that fury. Rudimentary piping, plumbing began to be installed. So that dunny is the beginning of modern hygiene in St Kilda. Actually, while I'm here, I'll be with you in a minute, OK? Oh, sorry, this is rather awkward, isn't it? Tell you what, I'll catch up with you down the road a bit. By the 1860s, the knobs no longer had St Kilda to themselves, thanks to these. Well, steam trains, actually. This is where St Kilda railway station was built in Victorian times. Of course, it's long gone now, but you can imagine, can't you, each weekend, thousands of trippers flooding off the train and heading off down to the beach for the Victorian equivalent of ice cream cones and hot dogs and tattoos. Should be another T there, shouldn't there? You wouldn't trust a tattoo artist who couldn't spell, would you? Anyway, all this completely transformed St Kilda. By the end of the 1880s, virtually all of the rich had upped sticks and left, and houses like Eldon had either been transformed into apartments or else they'd been knocked down, and big hotels like that one had been put up in their place. When this hotel, the George, was built in 1868, it was considered pretty highfalutin, but it's had lots of makeovers since then, not all of them for the better. This is it round about 1970, and that is supposed to stand for This Is the Show. Whether you believe that or not is up to you, but it was definitely a strip joint at that time, and it definitely had acts on the bill like Vanessa the Undresser. I think we can certainly say this was the hotel's low point. This is it. It soon picked up again in the 1970s and 1980s. Rents were very cheap around here, there's a very edgy vibe, and a lot of young people wanted to rebel and do their own thing. So what did they do? They set up band after band after band. To Australia's punks and new romantics, St Kilda was the new musical capital of the world. Night after night, they packed out venues like the George Ballroom and pogoed themselves into a scowling, sweaty frenzy. Cool. This really is the faded glory of times past, isn't it?
It certainly is.
What bands played here?
Look, there was many bands played, but some of the most notable, I guess, was Boys Next Door with Nick Cave up front. In Excess played here, Midnight Oil. The Models, Hunters and Collectors played their first gig at this hotel.
How many people could you squeeze in here?
Thousands.
What did you do with all the money?
Well, quite often we had to actually... Stuff it down our knickers.
So you'd walk through all the heaving crowds, waddling with all their cash.
Exactly, that's exactly what happened.
This is history, isn't it? I mean, it is modern history, but this is history.
It certainly is.
All that sweat, all that excitement and the thumping rock music and the money. And now, look at that colossal wreck, empty and bare. Look on my works, ye mighty in despair. That's Shelley, by the way. I don't think he ever played in a punk band, but he was a stonking good poet. And now, off round the corner to Grey Street. Which is a bit of a walk on the wild side. There may not be any coloured girls going do-to-do, do-to-do, but it is well known for its ladies of the night and shady characters conducting illicit transactions, if you get my meaning. Today, though, it's pretty quiet. In fact, the only thing that's grabbed my attention is this. A sign for a milk bar. You don't see many of them in Europe. And this is what the sign was pointing at, so what's all the fuss about? You know, it's funny. If I was coming into a place like this for the first time, I would expect there to be an actual bar here with milk on it and milk floats and milk shakes and iced lattes, that sort of thing. But there is no milk here at all, apart from a few rows of it in that freezer. And the reason is this. Milk bars were created in the 1930s because the temperance movement wanted to see an alternative to all the booze that was flooding into places like St Kilda. But as the years went on and milk became a much less fashionable drink, people kept the stores open, but the milk became a less important part of them, until now they're just general traders with a big sign saying milk bar. St Kilda. 1 minute you're dodging backpackers, punks and street workers. The next you're walking down broad avenues past pretty little houses with lovely leafy gardens. And before you know it, you've hit trendy Ackland Street, the bustling main drag with its trams and its shoppers and its buskers. This is the fashionable side of St Kilda with its cafe culture and its clothes shops. But originally it was Eastern Europeans who built up this whole area. And of course they brought with them their businesses, including cake shops. And there's only 3 or 4 left now, but one of them is preeminent. That's this one, Monarch's.
Very nice.
This is the original Polish family who set up this business, and then they moved out here and they recreated something just like their Polish cake shop. Dan, show me What is special about these cakes? What's that one?
That's the Kugelhof. That's the original version from Poland.
What does Kugelhof mean?
I don't really know. It might mean cake with a hole in the centre.
Ah, cake with a hole in it. That would make sense. Can I have a taste?
Yeah, help yourself.
That's fantastic. There must be about 100 million calories in this. You make these all on the premises?
Yeah, down in the bakery. Do you want to have a look?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's some
cupcakes too.
You've already had a cake.
Thank you. This way. Look.
That's the Kugelhof being made. That's Brad, our chef.
Hi, Brad. So how do you make a Kugelhof?
Well, look, there's some secret family stuff that we can't really tell you, which is
Are you serious?
Yeah. You might want to have a go.
Oh, I'd love to have a go. Yeah.
Swirl it around.
Spiral it around, out like that. Whee.
And then some of these can
Rather
go in the
nice,
oven
that.
now. So you can put
Go in the
that
oven?
in there.
Oh. Whee. I've made my very first Kugelhof, and I'm not telling you the secrets. I don't know about you, but St Kilda's rather tickling my fancy. After all, I've been able to fake a wallet take a toilet break, and bake a secret cake. And there's more where that came from. Stories, that is, not words rhyming with ache. Once the railway had arrived in St Kilda, and 20 years after that, the cable tram, this whole area was transformed into a huge amusement zone. There were cinemas and ice skating rinks and ballrooms and the old Palais Theatre over there, and one building that has got the most famous and scariest entrance in the whole of St Kilda, with its big staring eyes and its great cavernous mouth. Luna Park. Walk through this gate and you're walking through time. When this place opened a century ago, the first nighters oohed at tightrope walkers, awed at strongmen, and screamed their proverbials off on the roller coaster. Nothing says Luna Park like this ride. Back then, it was the Splash Mountain of its time. These days, it's a quaint reminder of a bygone era, the oldest continually operating roller coaster in the world. And I've got it all to myself, which should make it a bit special. I say should, because actually, it doesn't. All the rattles, bumps, twists, turns and drops are still there, but they just aren't the same without the ear-piercing squeals of your fellow passengers. Still, there is one advantage to having the key to this place. I get to see it, warts and all. Now, this is the ghost train like most people never see it. The ghost train is really culty. People go out to dinner and have their wine and their food, and then they come especially to Luna Park to do two things: to go on the scenic railway and to come on the ghost train. And look at this stuff. It looks like something out of a fetish house rather than a ghost train, doesn't it? In the old days, there used to be a bloke hiding here in the dark, and as the railway came past, he'd go and everyone would go, ah! But people aren't allowed to stand here anymore. I think it's a health and safety thing or something. It's sad, really, isn't it? But one thing I've learned that did make me smile is that the workers of Australia have a majority share in Luna Park because the union pension funds have invested a lot of money in it. So this bloke, apart from having a big face, should also have a big fist coming out of the side, like that. I wonder why no one's ever thought of that before. It's just started spitting with rain, which is fairly annoying. And I was going to go straight down to the beach, but when I was up on the scenic railway, I spotted this place and I thought, whatever's that? And I'm so glad I came here. Look, it's called Veg Out. And it's It's totally mad, look. It's a staggering place. Hey, Rob, is this your plot?
It's a mate of mine, so I'm just getting some of his weeds out for him.
How long's this place been here?
Community garden, I think next week it'll be 13 years. It was a bowling club for about 70 years.
It's the bowling club shape, isn't it?
Yeah, and these are the old club rooms. You see the old lamps. We've had World Series gardening here when we turn them on. Yeah.
How did it turn into a series of gardens?
Well, the bowling club, it kind of died out, I guess, in about 94, 95, and it was empty for a year or two. And the local council foolishly let us come in and plant some sunflowers. Yeah, and that's 13 years ago. We just thought, well, I think that's a good idea, a community garden, so let's try and make it permanent.
How come the stuff in it is so weird? Why isn't it just plants and...
Well, you know, it just makes it more kind of enchanting, and a lot of people just come here and have a cup of tea or have a barbecue, and their experience here is as relevant as, you know, silly old Lenny digging in the garden over there.
Lenny! Yeah. Come and have a chat.
Okay. I need a rest anyway.
Don't stop him working, mate. It's hard enough to get him going.
I need a rest.
How long have you had a plot here?
Gone 12 years now. It's good to get out of the flat, not watching telly. And if you got a wife or girlfriend home you don't get on too well, you say, I come back to the garden. So it's a good excuse to get out of it, you know, get out of the flat.
So it saves relationships,
Yeah, that's it. Oh, sorry.
Oh, not really. You got, yeah.
I don't think we'll go there.
Fair enough.
See ya. Is that what you call gardening?
Oh, yes, we're right. Who was that?
And just like that, the sun comes back out. Hey, this is Melbourne weather. And the markets along the St Kilda Esplanade are filled with people. By the 1860s, there were about 15 residential hotels all along here. And in front of one of them, the Royal Hotel, a little old lady used to come every day. She was called Granny. No one knew her real name. And she had a basket and she used to sell lollies and oranges. Got a lolly, love?
Oh, thank you.
That's right, that'll be a penny. An old penny. And it wasn't really much of a business, as you can imagine. But after about a year, the bloke who owned the Royal Hotel... Hello, how do you do?
Hi, Tony.
Hello, just telling a story, all right? Yeah, after about a year, this bloke took pity on her and he bought an awning and he tied it to a tree and said that Granny could work from there. And so she did very well. Look, I'm transforming myself into Granny. Amazing, isn't it? Yeah, the storm came, whoosh, and it blew down the awning, blew down the tree, damaged the hotels. It seemed as though Granny's time was up, but it wasn't, because by that time she was so famous, so celebrated amongst the local people that they had a charity concert and they raised so much money that Granny was able to afford to buy a brand new shop. Granny lives again. And for 10 years she operated out of that shop. And when she died, they knocked it down because everybody said that nobody could run a shop like Granny. I think that's really sweet, don't you? I don't think this suits me really, do you? Thanks anyway. St Kilda's iconic beach is my last stop. I'm not here to soak up the rays, though. In fact, just the opposite. This walk is finishing when the sun goes down and some tiny stars come out. I've just come all the way up that long pier, and hopefully I've saved the best till last. I've got privileged access tonight in order to see some of St Kilda's most distinguished residents. Tiana, I'm hearing all these noises. Have you got something?
I sure do. Did you want to come and have a look?
Yeah.
Right, if you pop down
Please,
here,
thank you.
just have a look underneath that
In
rock.
here?
Yep, under there.
It's a... Oh! Little penguins. You're very small to have made such a big noise. What are you going to do?
I'm going to weigh them in a minute. Did you want to help?
Yeah. Do they nip you?
Yes, they sure do.
It's blue.
They're very blue, these guys.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, it's nice and blue. It's actually just about ready to go out to sea. So we're going to weigh it now to see that it's heavy enough to look after itself when it gets out into the bay.
Oh, it's pooing, isn't it?
It sure is.
Here we go. Come on. It's all right.
Put it nice and wide. And
Oh,
sorry.
I got a real nip then. Ooh, you little terror. This one is almost dead on a kilogram.
Yeah.
They all live on this spit here.
Yep.
When was it built?
It was built for the 56 Melbourne Olympic Games.
So they must have come after that.
Yeah, exactly right.
Where do you think they came from?
We think that was Phillip Island because the penguins from there, they use the bay to feed in.
And how many have you got now?
Around about 1,000.
But very few people know about them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a little hidden secret that we've got in St Kilda.
Well, thank you for letting me see it. What a lovely way to end a walk. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you, St Kilda, for your flora, fauna, subcultures, new cultures, fun parks, greenies and grannies. I really love St Kilda. It's so varied, from the corroboree tree to the punk rockers. And all right, it does have its seamy side, everyone knows that. But the fact that 1,000 penguins have recolonised it in bird's eye view of the city of Melbourne puts a bit of a smile on my face. If you were going to make a documentary about Adelaide, how would you start it? Maybe something along the lines of Welcome to Adelaide, city of churches and wide open green spaces, a genteel jewel in the heart of South Australia. Well, you might say something like that, but if you did, you'd be totally missing the point as far as I'm concerned, because Adelaide has also always been full of rebels, radicals and assorted rabble-rousers. Let's go for a walk through my slightly different Adelaide. Taking me to South Australia's capital, Adelaide. Time to lift up the skirt and see what she's hiding up there. There's a drunken misogynist politician, a horrible man called Ebenezer Ward, history with tomato sauce. And was it bloody?
Oh, absolutely.
And the end of Adelaide as we know it. That is a typical Adelaide reaction. Might save that one till last. Now, talking of rat bags, the brains behind Adelaide was actually a right dodgy Englishman who never even came here. His name was Edward Wakefield, and when he was 18, he eloped with an heiress, and there was a huge national scandal, but she died 4 years later without leaving him the vast amounts of dosh that he was expecting. So what did he do? He ran off with another heiress, except this one was only 15, and her parents went bananas. They followed the couple to Calais, dragged Wakefield back to England, and he had to spend the next 3 years in Newgate prison. And while he was there, he became fascinated with the colonies, in particular the notion that you could create a brand new type of colony in Australia based not on convict labour but on free labour. And he persuaded a group of like-minded individuals, and they drafted the 1834 South Australia Act, but then he fell out with them and emigrated to New Zealand instead. So there you have it. Adelaide was created by a cad, a seducer of underage girls, and what's even worse, someone who became a Kiwi. Clearly rebellion's in the DNA of this place. No wonder my rabble-rousing radar is on high alert. It is funny, isn't it, how some people become so acknowledged and respected and loved in their lifetime that people want to throw up statues to them. But the sad thing is that just a few years after their death, most of them are forgotten and everyone just passes by their statues. And I think it's particularly tragic in a case like this, the brilliant, the inestimable Mary Lee. if I'm going to change that, I'll need an audience. Ladies and gentlemen, who do you think has been the most influential woman in Australian history? Is it Julia Gillard? A definite no on that one. All right, is it Kylie Minogue? Dame Edna? I'll tell you who would get my vote. It's someone called Mary Lee. Have you heard of Mary Lee? Anyone? Ah, correct, yes. Her statue is right over there. One of you has heard of her. She was a very famous, in her time, woman suffragist, and she campaigned for years to get women the vote in Australia. What happened was, just before the turn of the century, a bill went before Parliament in South Australia because of all Mary Lee's work. But there was a baddie, a horrible man called Ebenezer Ward, who was a member of Parliament, and he wanted to wreck the bill. He didn't want women to have the vote, so he stuck an amendment into the bill which said that not only would women get the vote, but they would also be allowed to stand for Parliament, because his idea was that the male members of Parliament would never vote for that because it would mean women getting their jobs. But he was wrong. They did vote for that. So, without anybody expecting it, suddenly South Australia was the first place not only where women got the vote, but where women could stand for Parliament. And that was down to one heroine, Mary, and one horrible, drunken woman hater, Ebenezer. And none of you had heard of her. It's a good story, though, isn't it? See ya. I'm heading over the mighty Torrens River to revisit a spot of bother that warms the cockles of my very British heart. I'm from England. You may have noticed that from my accent. And I'm proud to say that for the past few hundred years, we English have been prepared to fight anybody at the drop of a hat. Tin pot dictators, Arab states, anybody who in the days before political correctness could have been described as an uppity native who deserved a good thrashing. 80 years ago, we even went into battle against one of our staunchest allies, right here at the Adelaide Oval. It's January the 14th, 1933, day 2 of the 3rd cricket test in the most controversial Ashes series ever played. The Australians are about to start their first innings, chasing England's 341. The English captain, Douglas Jardine, decided to ruthlessly employ the bodyline tactic. Basically, what this meant was that his bowlers would steam in, they'd bowl the ball really short and hard so that it would bounce up and smack the batsman on his body unless he defended himself, and there would be a ring of fieldsmen all the way around him so that if the ball hit his bat, it would glance off and they would be able to catch him out. It was highly aggressive and it was carnage. The Australian captain and opening batsman Bill Woodfill came in and smack, the ball hit him on the heart. Then the wicket-keeper Bert Oldfield took the crease. The ball glanced off his bat, hit his head and smashed his skull. Australians were outraged. Accusations of unsportsmanlike conduct were thrown about and the tour was almost abandoned. But the Australian PM brokered a truce and the series was played out. Oh, and my lot won, of course. I find that a really fascinating, if slightly controversial, story, but it's not the reason that I was so excited about coming here. Playing in that match was a brilliant young cricketer, probably the main reason that Jardine deployed Bodyline at all, although ironically he didn't feature all that much in that fateful match. But he went on to become the most celebrated cricketer in Australia's history. Who was he? It's me! Well, not actually me, but I have the privilege of wearing Sir Donald Bradman's pads and holding his bat, which is just about as close to heaven as you can get for a cricket enthusiast. It is a very small bat compared with what you get nowadays, isn't it? But why, you're probably asking, is there all this Bradman memorabilia here in Adelaide? He was a New South Wales boy, wasn't he, from Cootamundra? Well, yes, that's true, but he got a job here when he was 26 and loved South Australia because it was so quiet, and he hated the celebrity and the pressure on him that he got in Sydney. And I think you can see that kind of sensitivity in his eyes in that painting. Our next stop is the Torrens Parade Ground, where South Australia has farewelled its fighting men for around 100 years. I've always been intrigued by the enthusiasm with which Australian politicians send their fighting forces abroad to take part in other people's wars, whether it was the Boer War or the First War, the Second War, the Korean War. But by and large, the soldiers who fought there were professionals, they were volunteers, and when there was conscription, it was limited and it was very contentious. The Vietnam War was different. There was national conscription, and when the soldiers came home, they weren't treated like heroes. They felt ignored, unsupported. They often found it difficult to get jobs, and many of them were ill and they couldn't understand why. And a lot of them were barely out of their teens. This was a national issue, although a lot of Australians weren't even aware of it. That is, until a young man from Adelaide wrote a song about it. And then things started to change.
Mum and Dad and Denny saw the passing out parade at Puckapunyal. It was a long march from cadets, and the 6th Battalion was the next to tour, and it was me who drew the card.
John Schumann didn't go to Vietnam, but 10 years after the Aussie soldiers finally pulled out, his poignant lyrics shone a light on the traumatic experience of a generation of young men. And the name of his song?
I was only 19.
John, how did you come to write I Was Only 19?
Look, I wasn't prepared to write a song as important as this one based on my own recollections of news broadcasts at the time, you know, but when I met my brother-in-law, or now my brother-in-law, Mick Storen, and, you know, we got along okay, and I knew he'd been to Vietnam, and I also knew that he didn't talk about it at all. And, you know, on the wings of a six-pack, I asked him if he'd tell me his story. To my amazement, he said yes. But it was quite emotional, I mean, because there were some pretty touchy things that happened in the year that he was there. It was just this story going around and round and round in my head. And
once you started to write, how long did it take you?
15 minutes. It just came barrelling down my arm like it had already been written.
I know that during the Vietnam War I got involved in all the big demonstrations in London, and we didn't really think much about the soldiers. I certainly didn't think about what would happen to them when they came back from the war.
No, and I think what I Was Only 19 did was that the rest of Australia finally got it. It was a, oh, I get it moment.
Yeah.
My personal hope is that, you know, we will mature as a nation at some point in time where we don't send our young men and women off to fight and die in someone else's country, in someone else's war. But we're still doing that. And while we're doing that, I think Australians absolutely understand that we need to respect and support the soldiers that we send and look after them when they come home and their families, and not count the cost ever.
It seems Adelaide just can't help stirring the pot. Remember, South Australia was the nation's first free colony. So no convicts here, thank you very much. Mind you, their devotion to royalty went a bit too far for my liking. I appreciate that not everyone wants to be a Republican. I understand the argument that says that it's a good idea for the Queen of England to be the head of state because at least she's not a politician, so she's less likely to be biased. I don't happen to agree, but I do appreciate that position, except it does lead to some crazy conclusions. Like, for instance, all the way up and down here is King William Street, right? Now, at right angles to it there, can you see Grenfell Street? But over on the other side, it's Curry Street. And then further down, you've got Hindley Street, and on the other side, you've got Rundle Street. Further down than that, you've got something else Street, and on the other side, something else again Street. Why don't the roads that cross King William Street have the same name on either side? Because the founding fathers decided it would be inappropriate for anybody to cross the king. Now, how stupid is that? Nobody is crossing anybody. It's merely an intersection between two lots of roads. Isn't that oh, forget it.
Who'd have thought a walk around Adelaide would be such a struggle? Well, we fought the feminist fight, relived sporting battles, and waged a musical war. Seems everyone's on the angry pills. Then again, maybe not.
Look at that. Polites. Can you see? Look, there's three of them. Polites, polites, polites. What is it? Is it a typically Adelaide way of telling people that they need to be nice to each other? Is it a very gentlemanly form of physical exercise? Polites? No, it's neither of those things. That is simply a property developer who loved having his name up on his buildings. Kind of mad, really. Look, there's another one there. Polites.
Down King William Street to the site of a bizarre and bloody riot that took place during the dark days of the 1930s Great Depression. It's a hotel today, but back then it was the office of the unpopular state premier.
Ray, what was it like here during the Depression?
Well, for the majority of the workforce, it was tough, very, very tough. 1/3 of the workers in Adelaide, well, in South Australia, were unemployed.
Food was the big cause of the riots here, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yes. It all came to a head when the government decided to reduce beef, to take beef out of the rations and replace it with mutton.
So we're talking about the beef riots.
Yeah, absolutely.
And by some eerie coincidence, look what we've got in our sandwiches, beef sandwiches. Tell me about the riot.
Well, there were two groups that were participating. One from Port Adelaide, a working class community.
Here they come, yeah.
And they met up in Adelaide with another group, single unemployed men.
So this is actually here, this took place?
That's right.
There you are, that's here.
And they hoped to see the Premier, Lionel Hill, who was waiting inside, but not willing to come out. Surprise, surprise.
OK, so you've got these two wings of the demonstration, then what happened?
Police moved in,
Here's
a battle ensued.
Here's the police. Hey, off they go.
Apparently they were surrounded by police, so...
Oh, clear the glasses away.
Yes.
Here's more police coming in. Go on, my son. Go on.
So a battle ensued, or around about 20 minutes, apparently.
Was it bloody?
Absolutely. There were people taken to hospital.
Yeah.
12 policemen were taken to hospital.
Oh, coppers as well, right?
Coppers as well, yes.
Yeah. But did they keep beef as part of the rations?
Well, that was one small victory, I suppose, of the beef riot. And the beef remained on the rations for the remainder of the Depression.
You don't mind if I take a few of those, do you?
Go ahead.
Are you happy to clear up?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. See you, Ray.
Funny, I seem to have lost my appetite. I can't imagine why.
I've been walking around Australia for 9.5 episodes. Do you know what? I'm knackered.
That's one good reason to jump on this tram. The other is because the Glenelg tram ends up at the most iconic of Australian destinations. What? The beach, of course.
Does anyone here require a ticket at all?
Me, please. Going to Glenelg.
Yes, one way, sir.
Thank you, yeah.
$4.70.
It's a really old-fashioned thing, this ticket machine.
Yes, it is. Very heavy as well.
Do people like them?
Oh, yeah, they love them.
Why does it say your smile is the most important thing you wear on it?
Oh, they just, I'm not quite sure. They put sayings on the back of tickets. We get them on our pay slips every fortnight as well. Something to brighten our day, I suppose.
Does it work?
Well, you've just made me smile.
That's true. Thanks.
Thanks. Does anyone here require a ticket at all?
To stop at gallery, stop 13, request now.
Apart from Melbourne, where these things are pretty much the beating heart of the town, all the big Australian cities have lost their trams. Perth's went in 1958, then Hobart, Sydney, Brisbane. In fact, Adelaide nearly lost its back in 1958, but they saved one I'm on now, the Glenelg tram, which is an interesting word, Glenelg, isn't it? Because it spells the same going backwards as it does forwards. I think the word's palindromic, isn't it? Anyway, it means that whichever way you're facing, you're still going to Glenelg, I think, if you see what I mean. That is so South Australia.
Now, I know I promised you a trip to the beach, and we will get there, but before we do that, there's a lovely little quirk of history I want to show you. A suburban myth, if you like.
On December the 28th, 1836, the very first governor of South Australia made a proclamation in front of a little crowd in which he said, from today, there's going to be a new colony here in Australia. It'll be free settlers, they'll be diligent and hard-working, and they'll look after the natives and convert them to Christianity. And it all sounds a bit dull and ghastly, but at the end, everyone applauded, went on their way, and presumably most people forgot all about it. But then, round about 20 years later, this family called the Stevensons were holidaying here in Glenelg, and Mrs. Stevenson saw this tree and said, "This is where the proclamation took place. This is the Proclamation Tree." And for decades afterwards, the Navy would fire a salute here on December the 28th, and there'd be fireworks and music, and everyone would get basically hammered, except no one actually knows that this is the Proclamation Tree. In fact, a lot of writers are pretty definite that it isn't. Nevertheless, every town needs its icon, doesn't it? So they've filled up this tree with concrete. In fact, they've pumped it full of concrete in order to stop it rotting, and they've put up this great corrugated iron roof, which looks to me a bit like a municipal bus shelter, and hallelujah, Adelaide's got its icon. Look, over here, on this spot, on the 28th of December. Hurrah for South Australia, blah, blah, blah. Look, look. See? There he is again.
Ironically, Glenelg, the suburb where Adelaide was founded, is also the suburb where it very nearly foundered 140 years later, thanks to an unknown clairvoyant.
This is Glenelg Beach, a holiday playground for Adelaide folk. But in the summer of 1976, a house painter from Victoria called John Nash predicted that there would be a huge tidal wave hitting the beach and then going on to engulf and eradicate Adelaide.
Sounds ridiculous, I know, but many Adelaideans actually believed him. Many, but not all.
Rex, you were down here waiting for the calamity, weren't you?
Yes, I was. It was a remarkable reaction. Thousands of people came down here. I brought my kids. That's how frightened I was. And we all came down here. People were in dinner suits. They were in flippers and goggles. They had water wings, surfboards. People came down with swimming pools and were sitting in swimming pools, all waiting for this tidal wave, which we all knew wasn't going to happen.
I kind of understand that. What I find so puzzled, though, is the alternative reaction. Look, I'll try it now. Excuse me. It's just been forecast that there is a tidal wave on the horizon. It's going to hit this beach in 10 minutes, and then it's going to engulf the whole of Adelaide. You haven't moved. That is a typical Adelaide reaction.
Yeah, but it's...
Why did these other people get so panicked, though?
Well, they just... It became part of conversation in the city, to a point where people said, well, it might happen. We better be careful. So people cancelled hotel bookings. There were people who sold properties along the front. Don't forget, Tony, that we had just come out of a constitutional crisis. In 1975, 2 months earlier, the Queen's representative, the Governor-General, had sacked the government. The country was sort of divided. It was very tense. And I think people looked for this release. They looked for the laugh. They wanted to have fun.
And they certainly got it, didn't they?
It was great fun. It was really great fun. And we all laughed at each other. And, of course, nothing happened.
This whole business had become such a big deal that they had local news teams here, international news teams. Even the Premier of South Australia, Don Dunstan, was here waving and saying to everyone, it's all right, everything's going to be fine. Look, here's a picture of him sitting there in his 70s safari suit. And there must have been about 4,000 people in this crowd. I love this poster here that says, repent, the end is near. And just behind it, surf's up. Anyway, just before midday, the countdown began. 10, 9, 8, 7, and when they got to 0, nothing happened. Everyone laughed, there was a bit of cheering, and then they all just toddled off. But have a look at that photo of Don Dunstan again. See, he's 10 metres up in the air. He wasn't taking any chances, was he?
Still, I reckon someone who can do that safari suit thing belongs with all the other rebels, ratbags and rabble-rousers we've bumped up against today.
I've really enjoyed my walk through Adelaide. In fact, I've really enjoyed all my walks through Australia. But there's one thing I've been struck by, and that is the number of people who've said to me, oh, mate, we don't have any history here. Well, they're wrong. Wherever I've been, there's been ancient history, colonial history, history from the day before yesterday. And the great thing about it is, you don't have to jump in a car and drive thousands of miles to see it. Just stick on your shoes, walk outside, and there it is, on your own doorstep. And that can't be bad, can it?